Hello everyone, and welcome finally to the first episode of Odd Machine Garage's garage series. This is the episode uno, so number one, and the whole idea for the garage series season one is, of course, my new hobby drift build. So I'm trying to build a new hobby drifter to replace or at least uh, being to be a substitute for the Black Turbo M50 Scorpio that I've been driving for 12 years now. And in today's episode, I want to start off the garage series with the introduction of the power plant that I'm going to use, or at least the engine family in which the power plant belongs to. And the whole power plant idea started as a domino effect after multiple, let's say, incidents back in pre-COVID time. So back in the day, I was building a Nissan Sunny 4x4 N13, which I was converting to longitudinally mounted Volvo T4 engine. And the idea was to swap in Subaru axles, which I did. So they are front and rear axle from Subaru Impreza, basically GC8 classic Impreza. And then also the strut towers are from a GD Impreza. And then I have some Subaru Forester coilovers and so on. So I built the car basically up to that point before COVID hit. And I made this gentleman's agreement to buy a 6-speed DC-CD transmission from an 08 Impreza to match up with the T4 engine, as I know that driveline is basically bulletproof. But then COVID hit. The car, which was the donor car, it didn't turn into a rally car like it was supposed to, so I didn't get the driveline back then. And actually that pushed me into looking out for new projects to do when we had lockdown also here in Finland. So I ended up quite far from my other cars, and from the Sunny project I actually bought a 4-liter V8 Jaguar S-Type from the year 2000. So don't ask why. There were multiple other options as well, but it was close, and there were many incidents that led to the buying decision. So I bought that. The engine wasn't running, and I had to tear the engine apart, and that was basically the first time I really dug into the world of AJ V8 V8s from Jaguar. So that's basically the engine family that I'm planning to use as a base for the power plant of the new drifter. And let's take a deeper look or a closer look into this engine family from the outside of the engine. I haven't torn apart now all of the engines yet, but I will show you the basic differences between the different variants of the engines, and then I later show you also the internals of the engines and explain them more in detail. But in this episode we will concentrate on the different variants that I have here already available, and which I can show you from the outside. So let's check those out. So here we have the actual some of the actual engines from the AJ V8 family. But before looking into those, I would like to explain why I got involved, let's say, deeper with these engines. It started out with this car, which I bought as a fully original 1978 XJ6, and I restored it now 2022 to be our wedding car and to be a summer cruiser for myself. And I decided that I would someday in the future would like to have like a proper modern powerful engine in this one, because the looks of the car kind of are asking for that. And so I kept my eyes open for different sales announcements. I was really open for all kinds of engines, and then I bumped into an engine which basically looks like this, but it's now fitted already into the new drifter body, just to get some measurements out. So there are no mounts yet done, but it's just hanging in there, so I could measure around if I could fit this type of engines at all into the new body that I'm using for a drifter. And the engine that's going to be used in the drifter, at least in the current plan, it's called the AJ33S, and it's from a 2004 Jaguar XJR. So it's a 4.2 liter supercharged engine producing 400 horsepower and 550 Newton meters of torque. It's basically the second generation engine of these AJ V8s, and this one is also, but there's a difference between this one and the one that I have fitted there, because this engine in the picture it's from a XKR from 2007 or 2008, and the biggest difference in these two engines is basically that this one has variable intake cams, but the older one, the XJR from 2004, doesn't have the adjustable intake cams, so it has solid cams in it. Otherwise the engines are really close to each other, so the interfaces between the engines, like accessory components, they are basically the same, at least as far as I have managed to investigate so far. And the reason why I bought the XJR engine was that it was dirty cheap, because the previous owner thought that the cylinder head gaskets had, or one of the cylinder head gaskets had failed, and he had bought a new engine, and while swapping that in, he noticed that from that engine this coolant pipe here, which is below all the intake manifolds and the supercharger, that was leaking, and that was explaining the mysteriously missing coolant from the engine. So that engine might be in working condition. I need to check that, of course, but at least for now I'm hoping for that to be somewhat of a working engine. It had 200,000 kilometers or something like that on the clock, so not too bad. And then, as that engine was basically just a raw base engine, so no accessory components, no exhaust manifold intakes, no superchargers, no pulleys, no power steering pumps, wiring looms, or anything like that, I was looking for a donor engine that could be broken, but from which I could swap out the major accessory parts that I need. And then I found this one. And this, as I said, it's from the 2007 or 8 XKR, and that car was in a flood, so it's basically been underwater for some period of time. I think it was in Florida. But this engine was like complete. The engine and actually the whole car was complete. It was just underwater for some time, and that's why they didn't want to use the engine. They didn't want to give it any warranty. So I took the risk and bought it for a very small amount of money. And with this engine, as you can see, it has even the AC, power steering pump. There are even the engine mounts. They are not now on this engine. They are in the engine that's mounted in the drifter engine bay. But it also had the supercharger, which has the nice V8 engraving on top, or casting print on top. That's the M112 supercharger, which these 4.2 engines come from the factory. And then it of course had the intake manifolds, injectors, the charge air coolers that are integrated in the intake manifolds and so on. So these are air to liquid coolers from the factory. And they're quite decent. They just need proper cool water to be effective enough. Then it also came with the electric throttle body. So this is here, and as you can see, for everybody's surprise, even though the car has been under probably salty water, the connectors and the wiring seems to be quite good, even though it has been quite moist at some point. And then there were of course also all of the coolant piping and so on. So this engine is a real mystery. I think it had only 80,000 kilometers or something like that on the clock, but as it has been wet, I have no idea what is the condition. So this we will definitely tear apart and make a proper unboxing video, so you can join the excitement and see what the water has done to the engine. But that's the story of that engine. Then I have bought a third one. This is a bit different engine. This is bought because I did some initial measurements with the supercharger, and as it turned out, the package is quite high with the supercharger. So of course the supercharger itself and then the intake manifolds, they come to this space here between the cylinder heads, and the supercharger snout, or the pulley, it comes this far, and then the throttle body is actually behind the engine. So it's a quite long, high package to fit into a foreign body. So it seemed that I might run into some clearance issues with the bonnet, and I want to keep the car looking like basically stock from the bonnet point of view. So I thought that maybe I could use some parts of a naturally aspirated variant, and that's why I bought this one, because this is also a cheap piece of a V8. It's from a 2001 4-liter Jaguar S-Type, so basically the same type of an engine that I have in my daily driver, so I'm familiar with it. And it had all the accessories. It even came with a gearbox. And to my surprise, when I looked in the trunk of the car, I disassembled that engine myself. I found an additional oil pan, the upper one, which usually needs to be modified if you have some clearance issues, so I can modify that one. Then it came with two naturally aspirated intake manifolds, and this was interesting because this is the better one. This isn't usually in the 4 liter, at least to my knowledge. And this intake manifold, as you can see, it has the throttle body, the electric throttle body at the back of the engine. So this helps with the clearance issues. You can get a lower mounting or lower mounting height of the engine between the cylinder heads, and that helps with the clearance issue. And I'm not a big fan of superchargers. I guess they work fine when they are like well spec'd and you have enough cooling for the charge air. But I still rather turbocharge engines. That's I think the better way of boosting the engines. So my idea is currently that I will use the naturally aspirated intake manifold on top of the XJR engine without the VVTi solenoids and sprockets, so solid cams. And then I would build some headers for the turbo, and then run it single turbo in the drifter. So that's the big plan with the power plants. And the idea is now that I will strip down these engines later. I can show you the differences between them. I can measure the cams on them, so we can then see if the 4 liter naturally aspirated engine has better cams than, or let's say more aggressive cams than the supercharged versions, and if there's a difference between the VVTi and non-VVTi SC engines. So I will definitely check these out, check what components we can salvage and save, and then let's see what kind of a setup we will assemble from these engines after all of the studies that will be done. But that's a topic for later episodes. There will be a lot of content in those episodes, so I will just quickly show what are the differences, or tell what are the main differences between these two engine generations. So of course, as this is the supercharged version and that's the naturally aspirated one, the compression ratio is different, pistons are different, and the con rods are different in these two engines. Then in the older one, there's also difference in the liners. So the first AJV8s, they had Nicasil coated aluminum liners. So this one has those. And people who have been playing with, for example, BMW engines, like that one in the background, that's the M60 BMW engine, you know that when you have sulfur content in your fuel, or you have misfire problems, or some injector is leaking, the Nicasil coating gets worn quite easily, and then the repairing of that cylinder, it's really expensive and hard. So that's usually the risk with these older engines. Then, as you can see, there's a timing chain behind this cover, which is turning, of course, the cams. And in these older engines, the problem usually that breaks these engines comes from the chain tensioners. So they're behind this cover. And the problem is that they are plastic bodied, so the plastic gets hard and brittle after 20 years or so, and then it starts leaking the oil pressure from the tensioners, and the chains get loose. And that usually either makes the timing skip a teeth, or then there will be a worn out chain which then breaks and leaves the cams at a still position while the crank is still turning. So those are the biggest problems in these engines. Then one quite similar problem to that is the plastic coolant pipes that they use in these engines. So as you can see here, this is 20-year-old plastic which is cracked quite significantly. So this is what usually causes a lot of coolant leaks in these engines. And as you saw in the supercharged version, they had more money to use in that project, so they are aluminium ones, which you can also get for these as retrofit or aftermarket components. So that can be fixed as well. The same goes for the tensioners. You can get metal tensioners with metal body, so those won't start leaking so easily. Yeah, so that's basically the main differences between these engines, roughly. Of course, we will see what the difference in the cams are. Actually, I don't know that yet, and there's quite little information available, really specific information about these engines. There are not that many enthusiasts around, so I need to measure those at least. Then I can trust that what are the cams, what are the timings, what are the differences between the durations and so on. So that's something that I need to check. And for these engines, as you can see here, there's the aluminium piece already for the thermostat housing up pipe. And then these engines have iron liners in the aluminium block. So these have proper iron liner instead of the Nicasil coating on the aluminium like in the previous variant. Then as you probably noticed, these are quite nicely packed, so they are quite tight. As the engine bay is quite narrow, and these are with the aluminium block heads, and then the oil sump upper part is also aluminium. So these are fairly light, even though they are physically quite big engines compared to the displacement. Yeah, I know, if you compare it to the LS engines, they are so nice and small and available and cheap and whatnot. I only have one cam and so on, but I'm not into that. I try to go my own ways and make my life miserable with my own choices. So let's stick to this plan. And to be honest, it would be easy also to fit the LS engine into that engine bay, because what I learned while doing research on these HAV8s is that you don't basically have a rear sump oil pan available for these engines from the Jaguar car fleet. So all of the engines have basically this type of oil sump, which has the oil pickup in the front end of the engine. So this is what Jaguar uses in the S-Type, the XK and the XJ. So basically I don't have, even though I have engines from 3 different bodies, they all have the front sump, like here, there, and now you have to believe that the XJ version, which is already test fitted in the car, also has the same positioning of the oil sump. But what I learned is that this engine is also available in the Range Rover, and those have some kind of a rear sump assembly, which seems quite high, and I bet that can be a problem also in that engine bay, because from the crankshaft downwards the engine bay is quite low, or the ground clearance is quite low. So I thought that probably it's better at this point to drive that one as it's running with the original engine, and study more of these engines in the drifter build. So that's what I'm planning to do. this is it for today's episode, and in the next episode I won't be yet digging deep into these engines as it takes some time to rip these apart and measure things. But in the next episode I will show you the actual body that I'm the home for these engines, or the mix-up of these engines that I will use as the home for these. And please like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions, something that you want to know. I bet things will get more clear when we go forward with these builds and these episodes. So I tried to keep this quite short, informative, but package tight, so that there's not a lot of nonsense in the videos. So that's it for today. I hope to see you in the next one.